simile for the suffering in hell. In the Buddha's words, Bhikkhus, there are these three characteristics of a fool, signs of a fool, attributes of a fool. What three? Here a fool is one who thinks bad thoughts, speaks bad words, and does bad deeds. If a fool were not so, how would the wise know him thus? This person is a fool, an untrue man. But because a fool is one who thinks bad thoughts, speaks bad words, and does bad deeds, the wise know him thus. This person is a fool, an untrue man. A fool feels pain and grief here and now in three ways. If a fool is seated in an assembly or along a street or in a square, and people there are discussing certain pertinent and relevant matters, then, if the fool is one who kills living beings, takes what is not given, misconducts himself in sensual pleasures, speaks falsehood, and indulges in wine, liquor, and intoxicants, which are the basis of negligence, he thinks, these people are discussing certain pertinent and relevant matters. These things are found in me, and I am seen engaging in those things. This is the first kind of pain and grief that a fool feels here and now. Again, when a robber culprit is caught, a foot sees kings having many kinds of torture inflicted on him, having him flogged with whips, beaten with canes, beaten with clubs, having his hands cut off, his feet cut off, his hands and feet cut off, his ears cut off, his nose cut off, his ears and nose cut off, having him subjected to the porridge pot, to the polished shell shave, to the Rau's mouth, to the fiery wreath, to the flaming hand, to the blades of grass, to the bark dress, to the antelope, to the meat hooks, to the coins, to the lye pickling, to the pivoting pin, to the rolled up palliasse, and having him splashed with boiling oil, and having him thrown to be devoured by dogs, and having him impaled alive on stakes, and having his head cut off with a sword. Then the fool thinks thus, because of such evil actions as those, when a robber culprit is caught, kings may have kinds and tortures inflicted on him. They have him flogged with whips, and have his head cut off with a sword. Those things are found in me, and I am seen engaging in those things. This is the second kind of pain and grief that a fool feels here and now. Again, when a fool is on his chair or on his bed or resting on the ground, then the evil actions that he did in the past, his bodily, verbal, and mental misconduct, cover him, overspread him, and envelop him. Just as the shadow of a great mountain peak in the evening covers, overspreads, and envelops the earth, so too, when a fool is on his chair, or on his bed, or resting on the ground, then the evil actions that he did in the past, his bodily, verbal, and mental misconduct, cover him, overspread him, and envelop him. Then the fool thinks, I have not done what is good. I have not done what is welcome. I have not made myself a shelter from anguish. I have done what is evil. I have done what is cruel. I have done what is wicked. When I pass away, I shall go to the destination of those who have not done what is good, who have done what is wicked. He sorrows, grieves, and laments. He weeps, beating his breast, and becomes distraught. This is the third kind of pain and grief that a fool feels here and now. A fool who has given himself over to misconduct of body, speech, and mind, on the dissolution of the body, after death, reappears in a state of deprivation, in an unhappy destination, even in hell. Were it rightly speaking to be said of anything that is utterly unwished for, utterly undesired, utterly disagreeable, it is of hell that, rightly speaking, this should be said. So much so that it is hard to find a simile for the suffering in hell. But, Venerable Sir, can a simile be given? It can, Piku, the Blessed One said. Pikus, suppose men caught a robber culprit and presented him to the king, saying, "Sire, here is a robber culprit. Order what punishment you will for him." Then the king said, "Go and strike this man in the morning with 100 spears." And they struck him in the morning with 100 spears. Then at noon the king asked, "How is that man?" "Sire, he is still alive." Then the king said, "Go and strike that man at noon with 100 spears." And they struck him at noon with 100 spears. Then in the evening the king asked, "How is that man?" "Sire, he is still alive." Then the king said, "Go and strike that man in the evening with 100 spears." And they struck him in the evening with 100 spears. What do you think, Pikus? Would that man experience pain and grief because of being struck with the 300 spears? Venerable Sir, that man would experience pain and grief because of being struck with even 1 spear, let alone 300. Then taking a small stone, the size of his hand, the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus. What do you think, bhikkhus? Which is the greater? This small stone that I have taken, the size of his hand, does not count beside Himalaya, the king of mountains. It is not even a fraction. There is no comparison. So too, bhikkhus, the pain and grief that the man would experience because of being struck with the 300 spears does not count beside the suffering of hell. It is not even a fraction. There is no comparison. The law of the 3 seals. Number 1, porridge pot, is the smashing the skull open, peeling off the scalp, putting a blazing iron inside with tongs in order to burst the brain out like over-boiling pot. Number 2, polished shell shave, is cutting and pulling out of the strips of skin from the marked 2 points at the upper lips to the marked 2 points at the tops of the ears, continuing to the marked 2 points in the back of the head and twisting all pieces of skin to tie a knot together with hair. 2 people would insert a stick inside the knot, stir up, shake, and tear off all the skin, the scalp, and the hair. Then they would polish the skull with coarse sand to make it shine as white as a polished shell. Number 3, Raku's mouth is widening up the mouth with hooks and setting up a continuous fire inside. Another method is tearing apart the lips through the tops of the ears with a sharp chisel, keeping the mouth wide open with hooks and letting it fill up with blood. Number 4, fiery wreath is wrapping up the whole body with an oil-soaked cloth and setting it on fire. Number 5, flaming hand is wrapping around the 10 fingers with oil-soaked cloths and setting them on fire. Number 6, blades of grass, is cutting flesh into several unbroken strips, bound with skin from the neck base all the way down to the ankles, then tying the flesh strips with rope, forcing and hitting one to walk over his own strips of meat until death. Number 7, bark dress, is cutting flesh into strips, from neck base to waist and from waist to ankles, letting the flesh strips hang down just as one is wearing a grassy garment. Number 8, antelope, is firmly putting the steel rings on both elbows and both knees, inserting the steel stakes inside those rings, in fixing the stakes to the ground in order to prevent all body movement, and setting a ring of fire around until death. Number 9. Meat hook is striking a double sharp edge hooks into the entire body, pulling out small and large pieces of flesh and tendons out until death. Number 10. Coins is slicing bits of flesh at the weight of a tunlong, letting those pieces fall from the body and continuing to cut until running out of meat. Number 11. Lye pickling is slicing, chopping, cutting the whole body, and scraping out all the small and large meat and tendons with acid-soaked brush, leaving only the remains of skeleton. Number 12. Pivoting pin is making one lie on one side, hammering down a steel spear through both ear holes in order to tie one tightly down to the ground, then spinning one around by grabbing both feet like a person whirling. Number 13. Rolled up palliasse is crushing down the bone into powder with millstones without tearing off flesh and tendons, seizing hair, folding up flesh, skin and bone together in one mass, then lifting it up, lowering it down to make a round pile, subsequently placing it down as a foot wiping mat. Number 14. Splashed with boiling oil is stirring up the fiercely boiling oil and pouring it on the body from the head down until death. Number 15. Thrown to be devoured by dogs is confining the ferocious dogs, starving them to the fullest extent for several days, then letting them out to devour the flesh and skin to the remains of skeleton. Simile of the lifespan in hell. Pante. Saraput and Mokalana have evil desires and have come under the control of evil desires. Do not say so, Kokalika. Do not say so, Kokalika. Place confidence in Saraput and Mokalana, Kokalika. Saraput and Mokalana are well behaved. Then for a second time, and yet a third time, the Piku, Kokalika, repeated his words, and a second time, and third time, the Blessed One reproved him with the same words. Then the Piku Kokalika rose from his seat, paid homage to the Blessed One, circumambulated the Blessed One, keeping the right side toward him, and departed. Then when the night had passed, the Blessed One addressed the Pikus. Pikus, last night, when the night had advanced, Brahma Sahampati approached me and said to me, Pante, the Piku Kokalika has died, and because of his resentment against Saraput and Mokalana, after death he has been reborn in the Red Lotus Hell. He then paid homage to me, circumambulated me keeping the right side towards me, and disappeared right there. How long, Pante, is the lifespan in the world Red Lotus Hell? The lifespan in the Red Lotus Hell is long, Piku. It is not easy to count it and say it is so many years, or so many hundreds of years, or so many thousands of years, or so many hundreds of thousands of years. Then is it possible, Pante, to give a simile? It is, Piku. Suppose there was a kosalam cartload of 20 measures of sesamum seed. At the end of every 100 years a man would remove one seed from it. In this manner, the kosalan cart of 20 measures of sesamum seed might be depleted and eliminated more quickly than a life in a single Abuddha hell would go by. One life in the Nirabuddha hell is the equivalent of 20 lives in the Abuddha hell. One life in the Ababa hell is the equivalent of 20 lives in the Nirabuddha hell. One life in the Aha hell is the equivalent of 20 lives in the Ababa hell. One life in the Atata hell is the equivalent of 20 lives in the Ahaha hell. One life in the water lily hell is the equivalent of 20 lives in the Atata hell. One life in the sweet fragrance hell is the equivalent of 20 lives in the water lily hell. One life in the blue lotus hell is the equivalent of 20 lives in the sweet fragrance hell. One life in the white lotus hell is the equivalent of 20 lives in the blue lotus hell. And one life in the red lotus hell is the equivalent of 20 lives in the white lotus hell. Now, because he harbored resentment against Sariput in Mokkallana, the Piku Kokalaka has been reborn in the red lotus hell. This is what the Blessed One said. Having said this, the Fortunate One, the teacher, further said this: when a person has taken birth, an axe is born inside his mouth, with which the fool cuts himself by uttering wrongful speech. He who praises one deserving blame, or blames one deserving praise, casts with his mouth an unlucky throw by which he finds no happiness. Slight is the unlucky throw at dice that results in the loss of one's wealth, the loss of all, oneself included. Much worse is this unlucky throw of harboring hate against the holy ones. For 100,036 Nirabhutas plus 5 Abhutas, the slander of noble ones goes to hell, having defamed them with evil speech and mind.